over to Saniel. He can give you a bit more about the themes and we'll look where we'll be going today.
Yeah, great to be here with you. And we'll have introductions in a few minutes because some of you haven't been to either of our more introductory events, so we want to spend a couple minutes just getting us into the room with you. I've been a lifelong spiritual seeker until in 1992, to my great amazement, I found. And that sort of ended the seeking thing rather abruptly. And having come from a tradition, in part significantly based in Indian yoga and conducted by spiritual adepts from that part of the world over the many centuries, within a few days of this awakening happening, it became evident to me that I was not only in a different condition, but it was also becoming contagious to others. The process of what we call transmission was activated. And since my training had been entirely in such schools where that was part of life, I recognized what was going on, and it dawned on me, well, if under the circumstances that I had been able to find myself, my true being, we'll go into that in some detail today, what we mean by awakening. If I could do this, it seemed to me that pretty much anybody who truly had the desire and the resources could do the same thing. So my impulse was to share this with as many people as possible. And a term that became important to me early on was to democratize it. The democratic or democratizing impulse in human society and culture has been steadily evolving and emerging more and more strongly over many, many centuries, millennia really. In some ways it was there in our earlier cultural forms before we conceived great city-state type organizations and political structures. And as I believe, I think it was one of Churchill's great quotes, something along the lines of, paraphrasing terribly, democracy sucks, but it's better than everything else. And in spirituality, we're finding that to be true as well. So my whole impulse has been share the goods, get everybody who wants to be awakened and clarified in themselves, who wants to know the difference between seeking and finding, not by having to think about it, but just because they can't seek anymore the way they used to. We wanted to make that possible for everyone. Hi, Dad. Welcome, welcome. We're going to get to introductions of you guys in just a minute, so let's get situated here. So, anyway, since 1992, late 1992, this has been the whole focus of my life, and I've been tremendously blessed to find people who really had the drive and the intelligence and the heart to do exactly what I was hoping they'd be able to. So now many hundreds of people have gone through a fundamental, stable, permanent, at least in this lifetime, we're not making predictions, but in this life, an embodiment of simultaneously their divine and human nature. And when we're talking about whole body awakening to the force of your destiny, that awakening process, as you'll see, is a major piece of that. So we've now also created the first expression of that whole work for me has come to be called Waking Down in Mutuality. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but it implies awakening and coming down fully into our earthness with our spiritness, and doing so with others. So as Linda was indicating a few minutes ago, part of what will be very central to our work today is you all interacting with each other, as well as us interacting with you. And to skip right on to the theme of the day, some years after getting this work underway. Quite a few, really, more than a decade later, as the process by which people could readily access these awakenings for themselves. As that process became more and more well developed in our community, and there's now a network of 30-plus teachers and others who are formal mentors, and pockets of people around the country in the U.S. and around the world, more and more. And most people we discovered went through this stable, permanent shift into a stable, permanent quality of awakeness or conscious presence within somewhere between a few months and a few years, which in and of itself we began to discover was overturning the traditional expectations, which traditionally, some people are laughing, in many schools you're warned when you get on an awakening path, well, only a few in any generation will fulfill this, so just prepare for lifetimes of work. In effect, lifetimes of rehearsal before you actually get here. And for us, that just hasn't been the way it's been. I mean, it's not a theoretical matter for us. People, as my friends started saying, people drop. They drop in with their divine fullness in a fundamental way. We call it a second birth. And in some ways it's misleading, because for some people it's more like oozing rather than an instant. And for others it is an instantaneous recognition. Please.
There's also the fact that some individuals come into the work without the intention of quote-unquote awakening, or a non-dual awakening. I know most of you probably understand what that means, you know, marrying spirit and matter. Our process is about awakening as consciousness, but in the body, in life, not negating. You don't have to negate any part of who you are. You don't have to perfect the body-mind. You don't have to transcend the ego. You embrace every part of who you are. So sometimes people come in, though, and they don't have that kind of background of wanting to have a conscious awakening or an embodied awakening. They come in and they just say, I just feel not whole. I feel kind of empty and I need support. I want to be held. I want to be more full in my life. I want to be an authentic human being, moving in the world, serving others, and being more present to myself and to others. And it's actually interesting, because my process initially, when I first met Saniel in 1994, it wasn't about awakening for me initially. It was really that. It was really me feeling like there was something so missing in my life, and I had done such a huge eclectic kind of seeking for years, and read books and went to lectures and saw teachers, that I got very wonderful pieces off of those experiences, and yet they weren't the piece that healed this empty void feeling that I felt literally in my body. When I first met Saniel, I realized he's speaking something that is very different from what I've been hearing in some of these other paths that I've been exploring. And what I eventually started to feel was a landing in myself that was very intriguing and accelerated and unexpected, really. And so as I continued to dive deeper into my work with Saniel and with a few others who were involved in the Waking Down work at the time, I realized that I actually am realizing, and I actually am claiming my own divinity, but in a very natural, organic manner. And I continued working with Saniel. I found that eventually all the other paths kind of drifted away. So I'm a good example of one of those people who can come into the work without that intention or desire or dire need to realize, and yet you still feel like something is missing. The realization itself lands fully in you as you continue to, just as Saniel pointed out, drop into the divinity of your humanity, and the embrace of all sides of who you are, and also the embrace of the other.